Stray Cat Rock, Delinquent Girl Boss. This is a Japanese film, and it goes by a few different names, I believe, like in the English translation. Instead of Stray Cat Rock, I think sometimes it's called Alley Cat Rock. Instead of Delinquent Girl Boss, it's sometimes, I don't know, Female Girl Boss, or I don't know. There's a few different names, but I think one of the more common names is Stray Cat Rock, Delinquent Girl Boss. So this is kind of a Japanese exploitation youth movie from 1970. I actually came across this series. This is the first in a series of movies when I was at Village Vanguard in Japan. Okay, so a little bit of background here. I lived in Japan for 8 years, from 2001 to 2009. While I was living in Japan, there was a bookstore called Village Vanguard, which it was kind of a bookstore, and it was kind of an oddity store. They just sold a lot of odd things. It was big enough. I mean, they've got chains all over Japan. So you wouldn't really want to call it like counterculture, because it's like it's part of the establishment. They're a big chain, and they were in all the big shopping malls when I lived in Japan. But they do kind of sell kind of youth-oriented stuff and counterculture stuff. And if I had a free afternoon, or if I was bored, I used to just spend time wandering through there, looking at all the books and CDs and odd stuff. There was just kind of an odd collection of pop culture stuff there. They had a lot of stuff that was just, I guess, designed to appeal to rebellious youth or kind of shock middle-class sensibilities. But there wasn't really a consistent ideology. I mean, they had kind of books about Che Guevara, but they also had books about like, some of these right-wing Japanese politicians. So it was just kind of a mixture of stuff, but it was just interesting to look through and kind of see what was popular with Japanese young people nowadays or whatever. And then one day I came across this CD, which was a kind of a collection of music from the Stray Cat Rock movie series. And I'd never heard of that movie series before, but just kind of looking at the pictures from the CD, you could tell like this was from like the late 60s, early 70s, just had that kind of fashion to it, that kind of vibe. And it was kind of like a young people standing around and posing like with a bunch of guns, or like with a bunch of cars, and kind of, it was a little bit hard to tell what the message of it was really, but you could tell this was kind of some sort of counterculture movies from that period. And I was at the time very interested in Japanese counterculture from the 60s and 70s and the Japanese student youth movement and kind of all that type of stuff. So I ended up buying this CD, and the CD actually was a little bit cheesy, but it was kind of good fun, kind of psychedelic jazz type stuff, or jazz rock type music, good to listen to when you're cruising in the car. And for a long time, I was kind of curious to track down these movies, but never could find them. And then, round about 2007, these movies got re-released on DVD. Like they were old movies, but they got kind of a new package and new releases, and they showed up at my DVD store. And I thought, great, I've been so curious about these movies for so long. So I ended up watching all 5 of them, and in time, I'll review the whole series. But this is the first one right off the bat. The film stars Meiko Keiji, who was in a number of these, actually, youth exploitation movies. She was also in Female Prisoner number 701, Scorpion, which is a bit kind of another exploitation or sexploitation film. And this movie as well is kind of like a youth culture exploitation film, but it is kind of part of the sexploitation genre of the early 70s. It's not nearly as offensive as the Female Prisoner series, But there are a few elements of sadism that are mixed in this movie, which is going to give me pause before recommending it. I guess maybe from that title, Delinquent Girl Boss, you maybe figured out it was a bit of a sexploitation movie. But there is a lot to like about this film, especially if you think old retro stuff is really cool, like I do. Actually, I should rephrase that. Only if you think old retro stuff is really cool. Like the whole vibe of this film is just old retro stuff. There's the old cheesy music, there's the outlandish 60s fashion, there's the psychedelic light scenes, there's the motorcycle chases with the rock music playing in the background. And they get a lot of old Japanese rock groups into this movie. There's what was popular at the time was what they called group sounds in Japan, which was kind of like these four-piece bands, which are kind of a rip-off of the Beatles or the Monkees or that kind of scene. And so one of them, which was the Mops, which I'm actually was vaguely familiar with before watching this movie, because I listened to a lot of old Japanese music. They're in this movie. They're playing in one of the clubhouse scenes. And there's a famous singer in here called Akiko Wada, or Wada Akiko, depending on whether you say the Japanese way or the English way. Now, she is interesting because she was really popular in the late 60s, but she's one of those entertainers who has managed to stay popular through the years. So she was like, even when I was living in Japan in the early 2000s, she was like still a fixture of Japanese TV. Of course, she was a middle-aged woman by that time, and she was kind of popular with middle-aged people. So it was kind of strange to kind of watch this movie and remember, yeah, at one time she was a youth icon. So it's interesting. Her music in the late 60s was kind of like psychedelic music combined with like a Tom Jones type Las Vegas showman, like a lot of kind of power saxophones in the background. She's got a great husky voice. And they make use of her singing in this movie in a rather cheesy way, but again, as with the whole movie, it's kind of delightfully cheesy. She will just kind of break into song at really odd moments. Like they just wanted to cram one of her songs in here, but they couldn't think of a way to do it gracefully. So they just do it really awkwardly. But it's all part of the fun with a cheesy old movie like this. So yeah, in conclusion, this is kind of there are elements of sexploitation in this movie, so I would be cautious before recommending it. But it is also just kind of pure 1970s retro cheesiness. And if that appeals to you, that's really in this movie.